change from one condition to another.
We are now at a new crossroad where change is evident once again.
What does not serve us must transform us anew.
Returning to our original state of oneness and true nature of that which created who we truly are.
Confusion was the way of the past. Enlightenment is the way of the now and future. Shedding away the layers of deceit.
We now bring you the transformation of the two who started as one. Our fearless planet never stands still.
Earth has been in a process of transition, and we are not exempt from this remarkable ongoing reality. Well, good evening and welcome to Transition Radio's Real Talk with the Cummings. My name is Mark Angelo.
And I'm Lynna Ariel. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. Elliot, I see you're in the chat. Thanks for coming on.
No, you haven't missed anything. We just started
We just started
right now. I just decided to put that up there. We've been dealing with a lot of people on Twitter. So these are things that, are coming to mind that we might be talking about, and actually wanted to share a comment that was written on our last show, because I think it's really important to expose a lot of these individuals and what they're doing. And I believe a lot of these parents that are not accepting their trans kids, or parents that are not accepting their trans adult kids, really have deep-seated issues, and in and of themselves, I consider that to be child abuse when a parent can't love you unconditionally.
That's one of the most important things that a child can ever get, is that unconditional love from a parent. And it begins even before the child even comes into the world, when the baby is still inside the mother's womb. I mean, the baby is a part of the mother's environment at that point. And whatever is going on with the mom is going on with the baby.
Exactly. So let me go ahead and share this particular comment that was left. I think it was our last show, if I'm not mistaken.
Because the topic was, what was it?
It was the last show that we did. I forgot.
We were saying that that it's not about biology. Remember?
I think so. Something like that. The last show that we did. But this person, found it, as many people do. They like to state their opinion, and that's fine. You're entitled to state your opinion. That's why we leave the comment up. But, really wanted to rebuke or explain over and over again, because it seems like
it's like a broken record. These people, they come in, they leave their comments, and it's like we've already addressed so many issues already. Since you and I have been together, we have gone through this same scenario over and over. It's almost like we could just hit a button and hit record or play or whatever. And
repeat, rinse, and whatever you call it. But anyway, and I don't know of something that we said that they decided to say. It actually does M. They refuse to call me by my name, Mark, so they call me M. Just because you damage your body beyond a safe and effortless detransition does not mean you have to bring the kids down with you. My detransition was just fine. I was
accepting, this person however they wanted to present themselves. It wasn't a problem.
But besides that, when I stopped taking testosterone in February, everything was coming along the way it needed to come along. There was absolutely nothing that I was concerned about, except for the fact that I was not happy being Maritza. After the detransition, and it went from February all the way to September.
Oh, maybe she means safe and effortless by, having facial hair on your face since you've been on T since 2003. There are many women. That's not a reason to say effortless detransition. I mean, yeah, if a person has been on T for 3 months, I guess you're safe, right?
Right, but okay, what I want to point out is there are women who don't transition who have to deal with facial hair because after a certain age, and I'm 55, androgen, the ovaries start producing androgen, the body starts producing androgen after a certain age, after menopause. So it's not a big deal. I wasn't in any type of distress or anything like that doing what I did. I was just not happy being Maritza. And that's the reason I transitioned back in 2003 in the first place. I underwent a double mastectomy and a full hysterectomy at the same time for a reason, because I did not feel comfortable in my skin and I needed to do what I needed to do. The whole detransitioning thing, and we've explained this time and time again, was all based on many factors in our lives that we thought was the right thing to do for family, for religious reasons, and all this stuff. But let me continue reading here, or you can actually.
Oh, well, I mean, I wanted to address the
Okay.
whole thing about bringing the kids down with you. I mean, for a person who claims to be a Christian, and this goes for many Christians that do make their comments known on our YouTube channel, you always seem to use an accusing attitude when you address us. And this time, you're using the kids. Like there's a group of children out there that you are speaking to.
Yes, exactly.
You know.
And what about those kids that most of you parents who are of some sort of religious background that are abusing your children by forcing your beliefs on them and messing them up, creating all this fear, this guilt, this lack of self-worth by pushing your religion? Worry about that. You're harming the kids a lot more. What I'm doing is I'm freeing people, or we are freeing people to be who they are without any remorse, any guilt, any worries, because there is no sky daddy telling you that you're doing something wrong. It's all based on a cultish belief system that all of you have
and
created.
we got another, like, a message on Twitter. Someone linked a YouTube video of a Canadian man and his trans son, basically, who is transitioning, and she's like, I hope that you're happy, that you condone this, and it's all about how the dad feels about their child transitioning.
And that's why I said what I said on this, the article or the actual comment section there before we even started. So go ahead.
You have a transition partner. No, I am his wife. That's what I am. I am not a partner.
Yeah.
We're not in a corporation. Okay. So you never got away from the toxic mindset of transitioning long enough to give it a real chance.
I didn't want to give it a real chance. I did what I did, and a lot of what I did was to get back at you. Okay? Because I stopped believing in love. When our marriage broke up, it was just like there's nothing that's real. So I went on, and what we had, you had taught me a lot about Christianity. So I'm like, okay, so I'm going to take what you have taught me and I'm going to turn it against you. And that's why I did what I did.
I don't understand how you can't imagine that would be toxic in and of itself, that you would say that he went back to toxicity when what he was doing was toxic.
Extremely toxic. Your body was maimed to the point that people were judging you off looks alone. If you knew anything about me, yeah,
really,
my body's just fine.
I think it's pretty
awesome,
pretty
actually.
Awesome.
Met a lot of men my age look the way that I look, and so you basically are categorizing individuals that have had a hysterectomy and a mastectomy as maimed. That's pretty sad.
Well, but you are admitting that Christians love to judge people.
Oh, of course.
It's like when I detransitioned, my hair couldn't be short enough for them.
Oh, I know.
Remember?
Because they all want everybody to fit in these little stereotypes. And so
your body, I'm sorry.
Including the Christians group you were hoping would be different. I had the Christians eating out of the palm of my hand. If I really wanted to continue that fallacy, I would be racking money in the bank because I was the poster child of redemption. I was getting money for writing articles. I was getting money to do talks. I was getting ready to have the Heritage Foundation create a massive video about my life. And I
That's
turned
some
all that
great
down.
pictures.
Yeah. Oh, I got
way.
some great. Yeah. So, you know, there was no non-acceptance. On the contrary. On the contrary. But, you know, people like to speak out of their, you know, where when they know nothing.
Well, people are flawed. Again, and had you actually read scripture, you would have seen that every person had messed up and fallen short of God. You know what? We had read scripture.
Oh,
I have learned about the stories of David and Daniel and all these Samsons and all these people, right? All these fairy tales that you believe in. And we had talked about those stories.
And that was being read. I mean, the Bible.
Yeah, your best friend was reading it to you.
Yeah, and I was listening to audio Bible, and I was like reading and learning and all
you were
that
listening
stuff.
To Christian
I
music.
really wanted to.
Yeah.
I wanted to like totally, and that's what people
yourself.
immerse myself into that till I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I couldn't do it anymore. It was like not believable for me anymore. It was like a moment. It passed, it came and it went. And I was like, thankfully now I'm an atheist. So where were we here? And had you actually, okay. But in the resilience and desire, so was it right? They were still successful?
It says, you had actually read scriptures, you would have seen that every person had messed up and fallen short of God, but in their resilience, those that fell short, and their desire to sow what is right, they were still successful. So she's talking about like stories like David and Bathsheba,
which are all based on fairy tales and Sky Daddy. Yeah,
person. You gave up detransitioning,
thankfully, in Christianity, thankfully, and being a good influence to these kids.
Oh, the kids again.
Actually, I'm being a great influence to these kids, that they don't end up dealing with the abuse that most of you adults do, that do not accept them and love them for who they are. It is child abuse, what you're doing. It is hurting individuals, making them feel like they are less than, bringing on shame. The same shame that I grew up with all my life, felt this big because my mother would not accept me for who I was. So if anyone is creating a bad influence on the kids, is the conservative and religious zealots that are making kids feel like they're less than. You gave up simply because it was hard. Too bad. I didn't give up. I just stopped because I didn't want to continue to live a lie. This is who I am, not some church lady thing.
And all coming from a person who uses a kangaroo as their avatar.
Exactly.
They can't even be themselves. They can't like show a picture of who they are.
It's crazy. And Doris had a great point. Imagine believing the Bible, fairy tales in 2020. It is a joke. For people to still believe in a Sky Daddy and base their entire existence on chapters in a book that were put together that don't even make any sense, that contradict one another, yet people are still believing in that.
Advocate violence, advocate slavery, advocates
all sorts,
the suppression of women, the oppression of women. I mean, it's like, it's a vile book.
It really is totally a vile book. Totally. So we got a lot to cover today, and but anyway, if anyone knows anything about me, is that I never give a rat's what about people's opinion. I learned that from a very young age when I had to deal with a very vile parent who spent the entire time criticizing me. So after a while, I had to learn to shut those words out, or else it would have destroyed me. And that's what parents, that's what you're actually doing to your kids when you don't accept them for who they are, whether they're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transsexual. While you don't accept your kids, you are literally tearing up their spirit. You are harming them in ways beyond your understanding. We don't belong to you. We're not your property. Understand that. We have a life of our own, and we are entitled and deserve happiness like everyone else.
you don't understand how deep the psychological wound is that you inflict on your child when you make them have to uh, come to some standard of behavior for your own like purposes, for you to be seen as a responsible parent and a godly mother or a godly father that is responsible for their family and their children. I mean, it's like you don't do this for the kids. You do this so that you would look good in the community.
It's all about their self-image. That's all they care about. Trust me, I know. Because
Darcy says it's delusions of grandeur when it comes to the Bible, especially those that say you're going to hell. They take so serious that it becomes a totem of hate and evil that their mental illnesses manifest from.
Yep, totally true. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about scientism. Okay, and scientism is really the idea that science is the best or primary way of generating knowledge.
And that's because we have been given all kinds of slack on Twitter about our stance with regards to biology and trans identity in general. And we could speak to the cows come home about how gene variants happen in the human species and how little is yet known in the sciences and stuff of the human body, how chromosomes work, how genes function, and all of this stuff. Right? But they cling to this but the science says biology is immutable. And it's like scientism refutes that, actually.
So
scientism is really the idea.
Just right here.
What it essentially does is elevate scientific values, scientific authority, and scientific evidence above all other modes of knowing, sociological, experiential, philosophical.
Right. And they disregard all that. They think that science is the be's all and everything else should never be listened to. It says that scientific knowledge is knowledge itself. This is not to undermine the role of science, but we do see that in certain kinds of debates about particular issues, people view science as the only arbiter, the only way to understand or settle an issue, when it's not.
Science is an aid to help us understand something, but it doesn't answer what we should do about it. We draw on other understandings and frameworks to do that,
such as ethics, values, human rights, whatever it might be. Science has no ego. It holds on to nothing, and it's constantly evolving. And with that said, you can't take science seriously because what we think today might be totally different tomorrow. The world is constantly evolving.
That's the thing. You want to base your truths and your foundations on science, yet science says it has no ego. Science says it holds on to nothing because one thing that could be discovered, now can change tomorrow. And science understands that. And scientism says, you know what? Things are bound to change. So we can't really hold on to absolutes.
And talking about that, the science has demonized testosterone. It has stereotyped testosterone, a hormone that belongs not just to the male species, but it actually is a hormone that is in both females and males. So we're going to go diving really deep about this hormone, the misconceptions. So I'm going to start by saying testosterone is understood as an exclusively male hormone, even though it also is found in women, but surely no scientist believes this.
There is no causal link between testosterone and violence. That's right, Radfam. That's right. No causal link between testosterone and violence. There has to be something else given the weak relationship between testosterone and aggression. There's some other factor that's involved, and it's likely socialization and cultural factors.
When Radfams turn around and want to stereotype men and call them rapists and violent individuals, they put that stereotype on men, but they don't like stereotypes being placed on them, right? They don't like that. They're like, stop the misogyny, stop the stereotyping, but they put all men on the same box, and they blame testosterone as if testosterone is this big, bad, ugly hormone that hurts people. It's a person's personality. It's a person's socialization, cultural factor. If you were raised in a violent home, most likely you're going to react in a violent way. Children are being programmed from the moment they're inside their mother's womb. So you can't blame a hormone for these actions. So testosterone has a fascinating double life. A molecule with a precise chemical structure, it also has an outsized cultural presence, winning praise and blame for a wide range of characteristics typically associated with masculinity. So if we associate testosterone with masculinity, so does that mean that butch lesbians or really masculine women have more testosterone?
Yeah.
Or is it just the personality, or just maybe the way they view the world, the way they feel inside? I don't know.
Many of the claims go well beyond or even directly against the scientific evidence about what scientists call T.
Testosterone is the male sex hormone. In answer to the question, what are male sex hormones? Well, the National Institute of Health says testosterone is one of the most abundant of the androgens. There are many androgens, but testosterone is one of the most abundant. A class of hormone that controls the development and maintenance of male characteristics.
Yes, men generally have much higher levels of T than women, but greater quantity doesn't equate greater function. Elephants have bigger brains than humans, but brains are more important to elephants than to us.
Exactly. So you can't base what you have been scientifically taught as something that is like concrete, because you can't judge that book by its cover. So elephants have bigger brains than we do, but last I checked, no elephants had won any type of Nobel Prize or done anything extremely,
Darcy
worthy.
says it's ironic that rad femmes have hate on men because of testosterone, a hormone that makes that males didn't ask for a man is not responsible for being born male. That's because they hate males so much they try to be male.
And that's pretty much what I said to one of them. You're turning into what you hate so much. They don't realize that this hatred they have, and they hate the violence. They're becoming violent. They're becoming vile. They're becoming extremely masculine acting, and all to fight what they hate. You don't get rid of war with more war. You don't fight the war on drugs with more drugs. I mean, it's just crazy.
But our point is that testosterone has been given a bad rap.
Yeah.
It's been called this bully that it's not. So its legend is more like believable than the actual molecule testosterone itself.
And so Dylan says, by the logic, women can also be violent rapists because women have testosterone as well. Exactly. But to be fair, there are many cases like that go unaddressed because women want to keep up a social image of innocence. Very true.
And that social image of innocence is no better demonstrated than when, that woman way back in the 90s, I guess, she drove her kids off into like a lake,
yeah,
and drowned them all.
Yeah, and claimed
and
that
she claimed she claimed that she wasn't there, that she didn't do it for a long time. And they found out that she did.
Wasn't there another woman that
there was
that
another
God,
one that killed her children in the bathtub, her 5 children. She drowned them in the bathtub and said that God had told her to do it.
It's crazy.
So testosterone drives aggression and sexual violence. That's what some people say. That's what we're led to believe.
Right.
Yet gold standard studies, placebo-controlled trials, in which neither the research subjects nor the investigators know which people are getting tea, have shown that even extremely high doses of hormone don't increase hostility, anger, or aggression in men.
So they did a study, and it shows that high doses of tea, literally does not create any kind of aggression. And there was a doctor that we watched, um, a doctor that treats trans individuals and prescribes hormones, and he's into the assumption that trans men are more violent because of the testosterone. That's a very incorrect stereotype. And when it comes to endogenous T, the kind produced by people's own bodies, the classic studies linking T to aggression and violence are badly flawed because of imprecise measure and poor statistical practice.
The levels of T in the body fluctuate from hour to hour. Mm-hmm. So there's really, and they can be influenced by different social settings, emotions, psychological circumstances within the brain. It's a very unreally, what's the word? You
unfounded.
Can't really, unfounded, but you can't measure it.
Exactly.
Really. You can't just
when somebody gets angry, it has absolutely nothing to do with their hormones. It has everything to do with the chemical reactions in the brain, the situation. There's a lot involved to just pin it on little old testosterone. So Dylan says, this country is so backwards. When a boy is raped by a woman, their parents congregate, congratulate them instead of putting these disgusting people in prison. Women also get a less prison sentence compared to men for the same crime. Yeah.
And I think that it's probably well known that these are the little perks. It's like when a woman gets stopped, a young woman gets stopped for a moving violation, speeding or whatever, mm-hmm. and she just
blinks
does her thing,
and
the cop doesn't give her a ticket. But if it was a guy, mm-hmm. There would be,
a different outcome for sure. Yeah.
Not all the time, but
most of the time.
Yeah.
So Dylan says,
I think in that case they would plead that they were mentally ill to get sympathy and to remove themselves from blame. It's a classic horror trope now. Sometimes women can actually be the worst people.
That's true. That is very true, but they can do no harm.
No, but then that what you're saying, a feminist will take that and they'll twist
it. They'll call you misogynistic, and they'll say you have self-hatred, and they come up with all these little words to totally throw away the whole situation or create a detour of sorts. So the more testosterone, the better the athlete, right? That's what we think. And that's what's been the big hoopla with trans women in sports, because they think that they have testosterone, which make them superhuman. Well, the science is quite clear. T researcher Aaron Bagish of Massachusetts General Hospital told the New York Times an androgenized body has a performance advantage, quote unquote, but
researchers affiliated with the International Association of Athletics Federations asserted that, quote, wide sex difference in circulating testosterone concentrations largely account for the sex differences in athletic performance. So this is what they're saying is what is true, but
TFX and athleticism isn't straightforward, and neither men nor women. At most basic level, no study has ever concluded that you can predict the outcome of speed or strength events by knowing the competitor's T level.
And while T does affect parameters related to athleticism, including muscle size and oxygen uptake, the relationships don't translate into better sports performance in a clear-cut way. Consider a study of 52 teenage Olympic weightlifters, an elite group, male and female. Among the boys, there was no relationship between T levels and strength. And among girls, the athletes with lower T lifted more weight.
Are we hearing that?
More
Yeah.
weight.
In the girls, the athletes with lower levels of T lifted more weights. In one widely disputed study, researchers claim to have found that high T levels predict high performance across various tracks and field events.
But in one of several analyses produced by the authors in 3 of 11 running events, athletes with the lowest T levels did better than those with the highest levels. You see what this means?
Exactly. So if you give a person testosterone, society consider it as a performance enhancers, and they have a big to do and cheater and everything else. But if you naturally have lots of that hormone, though it is a competitive, it's thought of as a competitive advantage if you're a man. But if you're a woman, at least according to some of the biggest sports association in the world, it's just plain unfair.
Female athletes like champion sprinters Caster Semenya and Duty Chand have had to fight in recent years for their right to compete as women because their natural testosterone levels are far higher than the average woman's.
So if you can't study testosterone by giving it to people, right, you have to look at the natural hormones levels and whether those correlate with performance.
Men have it in far higher quantities than do most women, and conventional thinking has long held that this is the primary reason that men tend to outperform women athletically.
But there are certainly a number of factors that affect athletic performance, and testosterone is certainly only one of those factors, says Joanna Harper, a medical physicist at the Loughborough University who focuses on trans athletes.
It's not clear yet exactly what other factors might be contributing, but Holt notes we can get some clues by looking at women with androgen receptor mutations.
And I'm going to take the time to say hello to Alexa Bunny. And
Nice.
she says,
Hi, I've been watching recently. Love your messages. Endocrinology is an unknown subject that seems integral to understanding much of the gender issues these days.
yes, and people are very much still in the dark, and they're not aware that science is evolving and changing, but they don't want to change because it's easier for them to just point fingers at us and try to make us feel less than. So anyway, androgens are a group of hormones, including testosterone and estrogen, that influence sex traits.
It's testosterone that determines whether a developing baby will have male or female genitalia. Its presence helps prompt the embryo to go down the male route.
But some people are born with mutations in their androgen receptors that make them non-functional. So even though they're producing testosterone, it can't actually affect anything.
These people mostly develop and live life as women, often not even realizing they have the male XY chromosome pattern.
So in several cases, they have severe cases, they have female external genitalia, though also internal testes. Though in more mild cases, the genitalia can be mixed.
What's strange is that women with androgen receptor mutations are extremely overrepresented among elite athletes. Even those with severe cases can't possibly be getting the benefit of their natural testosterone without receptors to carry out those effects.
And that's one thing people don't understand. You could be taking a ton of androgen, testosterone, whatever it is that you're trying to do, but if you don't have those receptors accepting this androgen, all you're doing is harming yourself. So you may have a very high T level at a moment in time, but it's actually not converting to what it needs to for the outcome that you want. So Holt points out some of these women have even had their testes removed, bringing their testosterone level to below female levels, and yet they're still able to compete internationally.
Many researchers now think it's factors on the Y chromosome that account for some of those differences. Holt's own research suggests part of it might be growth hormone, which varies between men and women and plays important roles in muscle gain and repair, among other things.
That could help explain why the research on natural testosterone levels has been so erratic. There's simply not a lot of great research out there.
As a result, Carcazes explains, researchers are forced to cobble together a picture of testosterone's role based on studies in men, women with differences of sexual development called DSDs, which includes androgen receptor mutations, and anyone given exogenous testosterone.
So there's not a lot of research, and for people to like just want to be black and white about this topic is unfair, because there is not a lot of research. Things are coming out. There's a lot of new stuff available. We can't be so black and white about this. So Peter Sunskin, a new retired professor of endocrinology at St. Thomas Hospital and King College London, has written extensively about testosterone relatives' unimportance with regard to athletic performance in women without androgen receptors mutations.
But he says when it comes to how the hormone might play a role in women with DSDs, the answer is that there is little or no credible science to answer the question. But none of this really addresses the issue at the heart of all this. When it comes to formulating rules for who can and can't compete, what's fair?
Exactly. What is fair? And so some researcher like Harper argues that there needs to be a specific limit on women's testosterone. Well, above that, and you need to go compete with the men. But many others say this idea of fairness is fundamentally flawed.
Sports are inherently unfair. And while there have to be some regulations to account for true cheating, it seems like a double standard to demonize women for the same kind of natural advantages that we appreciate in men.
And to simplify the entire debate down to a single, albeit important, hormone ignores a great deal of biology and sociology, says Holt.
We should celebrate those biological differences. The great Olympian swimmer, Michael Phelps, his body converted lactic acid 50% less than most bodies, so he was able to get an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't disqualified for being able to
have that kind of
to perform
ability. Yeah.
The body has different bodies have different biological
phenomena,
genetic advantages, and those things aren't, punished. People are different. Some people are taller, some people are shorter, some people, are stronger, some people are weaker, some people have a bigger capacity for blood flow and oxygen and all that, and others.
Some people repair faster than others,
yeah.
And it's like we're all different. And to blame a hormone, for the things that are not at all responsible, it's wrong, because we're not a walking testosterone or a walking estrogen set. We're made up of different things, different cells, different abilities and different disabilities as humans. And I hate to see certain agendas like rad feminism and the religious zealots use things as a tool or as a weapon to try to hurt us as a community. And that's something that needs to stop. People need to stop fighting one another, based on their own views and belief system. We need to learn to coexist, to respect each other's views, to be a little bit more compassionate and understanding, because the latter is it's crazy.
I know we didn't really go into much about it.
No, I know. I just took a few things. If you want more,
basically,
I just kind of picked through the important parts.
Okay. Well, many researchers agree with the IAAF and IOC, but many also think that separating men and women by their testosterone levels alone flies in the face of scientific fact. Despite all the debate, though, there hasn't been much of any conclusion about what the science actually says about testosterone's effect on women's athletic performance, and that's for a good reason, because there really isn't any conclusive evidence at all.
So when it comes to nailing down a link between testosterone and athletic performance, part of the problem is that, to put it simply, human bodies are complicated. We know that among elite athletes, men seem to have a consistent 10 to 12% athletic advantage over women.
Lots of people chalk that up to testosterone alone. But the truth is, oh my gosh.
What happened?
It changed it. It did something.
Yeah, but the truth is,
that
there are many other factors.
go ahead, keep going.
There are many other factors, from the hormones to societal conditioning, and might move athletic performance, making it difficult to pinpoint exactly what testosterone does for athletes. But one point to try to isolate testosterone effect is to give people extra hormones and look to see what impact that has on the person's performance. Like if you take a bodybuilder, for instance, a bodybuilder that competes in the Mr. Olympia, he's not just taking your average 200 milligrams a week or whatever it is that men's testosterone level is. Sometimes, they prescribe 100 a week. And these individuals take mega doses of androgen and not testosterone alone. We're looking at all sorts of different stuff that makes them into the superhero type physique that they develop. So, on average, a normal production of testosterone is not going to give you this massive, what's the word I'm looking for? Advantage, that people believe that you will get.
One study of professional male triathletes found that there was no relationship between testosterone levels and performance. Another, looking at professional cyclists, found the same lack of correlation.
And yet another, comparing cyclist, weightlifter, and controls to each other on a cycling test, found a negative correlation between testosterone levels and performance. A study of teenage weightlifters found no relationship between boy testosterone levels and their performance, and a negative correlation among the girls, meaning they performed better when their testosterone was lower. I kind of like, that's why I took a bit of.
Right, but we didn't read that. Some studies have even found mixed or opposing results within their own findings. One found that sprinters seemed to get an advantage from testosterone while other runners didn't. Another came to the conclusion that it helped female track athletes, but not male ones. There's also differences in results depending on what type of strength you look at. Endurance strength seems to decrease with higher testosterone levels. Endurance decreases with higher testosterone levels, while maximum strength generally only increases.
So complicating all of this is the fact that elite athletes' testosterone levels vary quite a lot. One analysis found that 25% of elite male athletes have testosterone levels below what the International Association of Athletic Federation considers the lower limit for men.
What's more, it wasn't the athletes in less strength or speed-oriented sports. Some of the events with the most men below the limit were powerlifting, rowing, track and field, ice hockey, and well, they said rowing again.
Yeah.
Basketball players and alpine skiers had some of the highest levels.
So yeah, it's not all about, how much testosterone you have. So let's see. Dylan says, let's get some of his comments. I think that adjustments to regulations to compete need to be made based on what the athletic strength are, rather than whether they should compete. There are several sports out there that cater to different strength and endurance levels.
When it comes to like boxing and different things like that, you have like categories for weight classes and stuff. So this idea that, if you're going to get back into the trans women thing in sports, usually the trans woman wouldn't be paired with the biological woman wouldn't be paired with 190-pound trans woman if they're 120.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
So Alexa Bunny asks a question.
what is your stance on energy drinks and affecting hormonal levels?
First of all, I want to say, not a doctor, and anything that I say or we say is our opinion, and everyone should consult their doctors for any type of medical advice. In my opinion, I don't like energy drinks. They affect your adrenal glands. Excessive amount of caffeine. The human body can only take so much caffeine in one sitting. There's been a lot of bad ramifications in using energy drinks and just in general. So if you are on a hormonal regimen, you've got to be very careful what you put in your body, from alcohol to cigarettes to anything as caffeine, excessive amount of salt and fat and things of that nature, in my opinion. So let's see here. Did you have an opinion on that?
Nope.
Okay.
And Dylan says, what? I've never heard of that argument, Alexa.
Pretty sure that there's a lot of studies because there's been a lot of people that have been hurt with energy drinks. It's like your body's not meant to take so much caffeine in one sitting. So Darcy says,
what's your guys' thoughts on the trans athlete Rachel McCann or whatever? People don't think she's on hormones due to her body size and shape because she's not feminine enough, though she's on HRT, and they say that she is winning because of her androgenic body.
well,
We've kind of covered her already.
But I wanted to add, and as we've been reading, it doesn't matter how much testosterone. You could have really high testosterone level and not be strong, fast, and have any endurance. Testosterone doesn't equate to strength. It doesn't equate to all these things. Obviously, there's other factors that are involved. There's a lot of big girls around in the world that are rugby players and they play soccer. And, I think she the one that lost 11 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. She
11
lost
of 13 times.
So she won one time, and she had lost another 11. So I think this has all become a very political statement, all in all, for people and try
it's a great tool for them because obviously Rachel's bigger than most other women would be that compete with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she's easily spotted and easily, they've made memes and pictures and they've been really cruel.
And that's what they love to use. The rad fams and the extreme right love to be able to nitpick and make fun of people. And they don't realize that there are a lot of women that look like Rachel, born biologically cis or whatever, and they're probably bigger than she is.
But see, they also tend to not feature the ones that blend in really nicely and are able to just, there could have been another cyclist there that was trans.
Exactly.
And they didn't even bother
because
it doesn't suit their purpose.
It doesn't sell opinions, So let's see here. They say she's winning because of her androgenic body. Okay.
I'm not sure if they're saying it's because of testosterone alone or because the way male puberty developed her. Again, she's lost 11 of 13 times. Yeah. She won a couple times. And when she loses, she's,
no one says
anything. But if she wins like once or twice,
So Darcy, most of the judgment is on her character. And I think because of that, they also judge her looks and levels of femininity. Honestly, don't know if she is, but there is something fishy about her. Fishy in what way? Because she's not feminine. Not every woman is feminine. We tend to want to put everybody in a little box, and I think that's where we're getting ourselves into trouble.
Alexis says, I'd like to add that hypersexuality has been damaging to society. Both female and males have been affected.
Exactly. And, putting everybody in a box and saying women are supposed to behave a certain way and men are supposed to behave a certain way or look a certain way, that's very damaging in general. So let's see here. Situations that's all I know about it. I only know what I've watched about her from one of Blair's videos. I don't know that full issue, though. Blair sometimes tends to blow things out of the water a bit.
Well, yeah, there's also this thing that YouTubers do to get views.
Exactly. Clickbait and, elitism, whatever it's called. So Darcy says,
I've never heard of that argument either about energy drinks, and I drink energy drinks kind of regularly. Oh.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of bad rap regarding it, and it makes sense. I mean, I can't drink stuff like that, like Red Bull. It really dehydrates you, according to a lot of the research and science. It creates a lot of cortisol production. Your adrenal glands get taxed. Rapid heartbeat and things of that nature could probably make people moody and irritated because of what it's actually doing. Long-term use of something like that can lead to a lot of problems. And when you're on hormones, I always say, please be careful what you do with your body because you're putting your body through a lot of strains and stress. So it's important.
Red Bull is really pretty toxic.
That's
Actually,
what
I've heard some really, really serious things of how dangerous Red Bull can be.
But
I mean, specifically Red
again,
Bull.
we're not doctors. You got to do what you got to do, and then test your own theory, because that's the best way to find something out. So it's never affected my hormone levels. My endocrinologist said my levels are in male range. And again, what does that mean?
And your endo is not your friend, right?
He said he was like not, but
Right.
they come up with these like
Male range.
with everything, blood pressure, sugar levels, and it's like, I don't think that taking a blood test at a specific time of day where your hormonal levels may be down or up or whatever else, depending on how you slept that night, what kind of food you ate, what kind of exercise you did, could really tell you what is the best range for you. You gotta like kind of test that hypothesis yourself of how you feel, how your body's looking. Are you sleeping well? Do you get anxious? Racing thoughts, tachycardia, all sorts of different things like that. Getting moody, cranky. Okay, so I just kind of miss. You want to keep doing because it's already, and we have that other long one.
Yeah.
I thought you just wanted
concise. No, I was just reading something else. But go ahead.
Okay, so let me see.
Because you said something about hormone levels and stuff.
I think I read that one already. And
so moving on?
Yeah.
Mark, I've heard, though, the whole thing about either Red Bull or Monster a couple of years ago, people thought that it could kill you, and they were making all these recalls. There were even ads about it.
Yeah. Like I said, I'd be careful. Anything that's, meant to replace your sleep, because most people, they take Red Bull because they haven't slept well at night. So they want to get, they want to feel like they're awake. Mm-hmm. And most people drink a couple of cups of coffee in the day, but Red Bull, it's really strong. It's a lot stronger and has a lot more chemicals. A lot of people would mix Red Bull with their alcohol. Right. And there's a lot of bad things that happen to people when they do that. Again, excessive dehydration, which I believe is one of the biggest things harming you while you do excess amount of caffeine, because caffeine will dehydrate you.
Right.
So, anything else you wanted to read on that?
No.
Nope. All right. So we're going to go into a very interesting topic. Do we want to talk about this now, the social Darwinism, or is there an part in here? Not yet. Okay, you let me know. Anyway, many of us, have heard this anti-homosexual brigade created by the extreme right and the religious folks. They make it sound like heterosexuality is the norm, and so we think. I even got when Lynna found this article, I was like, what? Really? It was like, it took me, it was like, yeah. So anyway, we want to share this with you guys.
Well, 100 years ago, people had a very different idea of what it means to be heterosexual. Understanding that shift in thinking can tell us a lot about fluid sexual identities today, argues Brendan Ambrosino, the author of this article.
So in 1901, Dorland's Medical Dictionary defined heterosexuality as an abnormal or perverted appetite towards the opposite sex. You heard correctly. Abnormal or perverted appetite towards the opposite sex.
That was heterosexuality.
Yes. More than 2 decades later, in 1923, Merriam-Webster Dictionary similarly defined it as, quote, morbid sexual passion for one of the opposite sex. It wasn't until the 1934s that heterosexuality was graced with a meaning we're familiar with today: manifestation of sexual passion for one of the opposite sex, normal sexuality.
Whenever I tell this to people, they respond with dramatic incredulity. That can't be right. Well, it certainly doesn't feel right. It feels as if heterosexuality has always just been there.
So, we can't go by what we think this day and age is considered normal. We have to look into history, really, dig deep and try to find the true essence, the true definition, what really the life we're living today. A lot of it is based on lies and control. So a few years ago, there began circulating a man on the street, quote unquote, video in which the creator asked people if they thought homosexuals were born with their sexual orientations.
Did you guys see that video? It was big on YouTube. It went viral.
Mm-hmm.
Responses were varied, with most saying something like, "It's a combination of nature and nurture." The interviewer then asked a follow-up question, which was crucial to the experiment. "When did you choose to be straight?" Most were taken back, confessing rather sheepishly never to have thought about it.
Feeling that their prejudices had been exposed, they ended up swiftly conceding the videographer's obvious point: gay people were born gay, just like straight people were born straight. The video takeaway seems to suggest that all four sexualities are just there, that we don't need an explanation for homosexuality, just as we don't need one for heterosexuality.
Seems to not to have occurred to those who made the video or the millions who shared it that we actually need an explanation for both.
There's been a lot of good work, both scholarly and popular, on the social construction of homosexual desire and identity. As a result, few would bat an eye when there's talk of the rise of the homosexual.
Indeed, most of us have learned that homosexual identity did come into existence at a specific point in human history. What we're not taught, though, is that a similar phenomenon brought heterosexuality into its existence.
There are many reasons for this educational mission, including religious bias and other type of homophobia. But the biggest reason we don't integrate heterosexuality's origin is probably because it seems so, well, natural, normal, no need to question something that's just there.
But heterosexuality has not always just been there, and there's no reason to imagine it always will be. When heterosexuality was abnormal, the first rebuttal to the claim that heterosexuality was invented usually involves an appeal to reproduction. You've heard it. It seems obvious that different genital intercourse has existed for as long as humans have been around.
Indeed, we wouldn't have survived this long without it, but this rebuttal assumes that heterosexuality is the same thing as reproductive intercourse. It isn't. Sex has no history, writes queer theorist David Halperin at the University of Michigan, because it's grounded in the functioning of the body, quote unquote. Sexuality, on the other hand, precisely because it's a culture of production, does have a history.
In other words, while sex is something that appears hardwired into most species, the naming and categorizing of those acts and those who practice those acts is a historical phenomenon and can and should be studied as such.
Or put another way, there have always been sexual instincts throughout animal world sex, but at specific point in time, humans attach meaning to these extinct sexuality. When humans talk about heterosexuality, we're talking about the second thing.
So Dylan says it's not surprising that that is how the definitions evolved in for heterosexuality. Talking about the existence of sexual passion was not something that was positively looked on. Also, just the religious stigma of sex and attraction.
Exactly. And he also says the term may have been invented, but actual heterosexuality has always been there, just the homosexuality has been. Okay, let's continue reading here.
Hannah Blank offers a helpful way into this discussion in her book Straight, The Surprisingly Short History of Heterosexuality, with an analogy from natural history. In 2007, the International Institute for Species Exploration listed the fish Electrolux addisoni as one of the year's top 10 new species.
But of course, the species didn't suddenly spring into existence 10 years ago. That's just when it was discovered and scientifically named. As Blank concludes, written documentation of a particular kind by an authority figure of a particular kind was what turned Electrolux from a thing that just was into a thing that was known.
Something remarkably similar happened with heterosexuals, who at the end of the 19th century went from merely being there to being known. Prior to 1868, there were no heterosexuals, writes Blank. Neither were there homosexuals. It hadn't yet occurred to humans that they might be differentiated from one another by the kinds of love or sexual desire they experienced.
Sexual behaviors, of course, were identified and cataloged and oftentimes forbidden, but the emphasis was always on the act, not the agent. So, what changed? Language?
In the late 1860s, Hungarian journalist Karl Maria Kertbeny coined 4 terms to describe sexual experiences: heterosexual, homosexual, and 2 now forgotten terms to describe masturbation and bestiality, namely monosexual and heterogenate.
Kurt Benny used the term heterosexual, quote unquote, a decade later when he was asked to write a book chapter arguing for the discrimination of homosexuality. The editor, Gustav Jagger, decided not to publish it, but he ended up using Kurt Benny's novel term in a book he later published in the 1880s.
The next time the word was published was in 1889, when Austro-German psychiatrist Richard von Krafft-Ebing included the word in his Psychopathia Sexualis, a catalog of sexual disorders.
But in almost 500 pages, the word heterosexual, quote unquote, is used only 24 times and isn't even indexed. That's because Krafft-Ebing is more interested in contrary sexual instincts, perversions, than sexual instincts, the latter being for him the normal sexual desire of humans.
Normal, quote unquote, is a loaded word, of course, and it has been misused throughout history. Hierarchical ordering leading to slavery was at one time accepted as normal, as was a geocentric cosmology. It was all only by questioning the foundations of the consensus view that normal, quote unquote, phenomena were dethroned from their privileged positions.
For Krafft-Ebing, normal sexual desire was situated within a larger context of procreativity or procreative utility, an idea that was in keeping with the dominant sexual theories of the West. In the Western world, long before sex acts were separated into categories, hetero and homo, there was a different ruling binary, procreative and non-procreative.
The Bible, for instance, condemns homosexual intercourse for the same reason it condemns masturbation, because life-bearing seed is spilled in the act. While this ethic was largely taught, maintained, and enforced by the Catholic Church and later Christian offshoots, it's important to note that the ethic comes not primarily from Jewish or Christian scriptures, but from Stoicism.
So, as Catholic ethicist Margaret Farley points out, Stoic held strong views on the power of the human will to regulate emotions and on the desirability of such regulations for the sake of inner peace.
Musonius Rufus, for example, argued on sexual indulgence that individuals must protect themselves against self-indulgence, including sexual excess. To curb this sexual indulgence, notes theologian Todd Salzman, Rufus and other Stoics tried to situate it in a, quote, larger context of human meaning, unquote, arguing that sex could only be moral in the pursuit of procreation.
So early Christian theologians took up this conjugal reproductive ethics, and by the time of Augustine, reproductive sex was the only normal sex.
You hear that? Reproductive sex, according to the church, was the only normal sex. Any other sex that anybody else had, masturbation, anything like that, was condemned.
So while the Krafft-Ebing takes this procreative sexual ethic for granted, he does open it up in a major way. In sexual love, the real purpose of the instinct, the propagation of the species, does not enter into consciousness, he writes.
In other words, sexual instinct contains something like a hardwired reproductive aim, an aim that is present even if those engaged in normal sex aren't aware of it. Jonathan Ned Katz, The Invention of Heterosexuality, notes the impact of Krafft-Ebing's move. Placing the reproductive aside in the unconscious, Krafft-Ebing's created a small, obscure space in which a new pleasure norm began to grow.
So, the importance of this shift from reproductive instinct to erotic desire can't be overstated, as it's crucial to modern notions of sexuality. When most people today think of heterosexuality, they might think of something like this.
Billy understands from a very young age that he is erotically attracted to girls. One day he focuses that erotic energy on Susie and woos her.
The pair fall in love and give physical sexual expression to their erotic desire, and they live happily ever after.
Without Krafft-Ebing's work, this narrative might not have ever become thought of as normal. There is no mention, however implicit, of procreation. Defining normal sexual instinct according to erotic desire was a fundamental revolution in thinking about sex.
Krafft-Ebing's work laid the groundwork for the cultural shift that happened between the 1923 definition of heterosexuality as morbid and in 1934 definition as normal. So you go from the 1923 as morbid to 1934 as normal. So times change, people change, things are changed. What was seen as not good, and it was seen as something abnormal, today is seen as normal. And it's like what's up is down and what's down is up. And, let's see what the chatters have to say.
Dylan says, wow, that's really interesting. I've actually never really thought about what things were like before sexuality was identified and cataloged, quote unquote. I also can't quite wrap my head around sexuality being disorders, unlike other conditions, which are much, much easier to think of as such.
Well, that's because we have been programmed by religion and think otherwise. So it's like the term history, his story, depending on who's writing, the account, and what we have been programmed to believe. There's so many things that we believe this day and age, and that's not true. A lot of things have been created, we have been lied to, and the more and more we open that Pandora box and the more and more we see, it's pretty sad. So anyway, masturbation is a human need. Some people never get the luxury of getting pleasure from another person. It's also been proven to improve mental health and lessen anxiety and depression and cures headaches. Yes, and there was an article that I shared in my Facebook wall a while back that talked about that, how healthy it actually is. It's release. It's animalistic. It's like pressure being built up. If you don't relieve that pressure, you're not going to be healthy. Your immune system is going to be compromised, and things of that nature. The same thing goes with, making love,
Ideas and words are often products of their time. That is certainly true of heterosexuality, which was born out of a time when American life was becoming more regularized. As Blank argues, the invention of heterosexuality corresponds with the rise of the middle class.
So in late 19th century, population in European and North American cities began to explode. By the 1900s, for example, New York City had 3.4 million residents, 56 times its population just a century earlier. So what does that tell you? Heterosexual sex wasn't really happening a lot.
Well, prior to the years, the 20th century, the population in the world was not as we have it now.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, we're talking like maybe 1 billion people, and now we have 7.7 billion.
Have we thought about that? Why this overpopulation? When you look at, we've been around, we meaning the human race, for a very long time, but all of a sudden there's a point there where the population has exploded. As well as, I was thinking the other day, technology. I mean, there was a time where nothing was really happening, and all of a sudden, after the 1950s, bam, we've got all these technological advancements.
I mean, the population in the world wasn't really that many people prior to, like, the whole concept of the Industrial Revolution and mass production.
Yeah.
the powers
Industrial
that
age.
be, they needed workers. They
Mhm.
needed to fuel their economies. They needed to fuel their quest for wanting to get more out of humanity. And so they decided back in the early 20th century, late 19th century, that heterosexuality was going to be deemed as normal behavior, and anything else was not going to be accepted. And I think this is where you could probably add social Darwinism.
Okay, so this is social Darwinism is a loose set of ideologies that emerged in the late 1800s, in which Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was used to justify certain political, social, or economic views.
Social Darwinists believe in the survival of the fittest, the idea that certain people become powerful in society because they are innately better. Social Darwinism has been used to justify imperialism, racism, eugenics, and social inequality at various times over the past century and a half. And social Darwinism is wrong because there is no higher class of human. We are all human.
Exactly.
There is no Aryan race. There is no master class of people. Even the Bible uses the whole God's chosen people of the Jews and stuff. And this was the basis for this definition for heterosexual, and anything else was deviant, right? To come to fruition is because if they could get heterosexual to be normal, they could weed out those undesirables,
exactly.
Right?
So anyway, 56 times this population just a century earlier. As people moved to urban centers, they brought their sexual perversions, prostitution, same-sex eroticism with them, or so it seemed.
By comparison to rural towns and villages, blank writes, the cities seemed like hotbeds of sexual misconduct and excess. When city populations were smaller, says blank, it was easier to control such behavior, just as it was easier to control when it took place in smaller, rural areas where neighborly familiarity was a norm. Small town gossip can be a profound motivator.
Because the increasing public awareness of these sexual practices paralleled the influx of lower classes into cities, urban sexual misconduct was typically, if inaccurately, blamed on the working class and poor, says blank.
It was important for an emerging middle class to differentiate itself from such excess. The bourgeois family needed a way to protect its members from aristocratic decadence on the one side and the horrors of the teeming city on the other. This required systematic, reproducible, universally applicable systems for social management that could be implemented on a large scale.
So let's see what we got on the chat before we keep going here. So Darcy says, I'm just making myself dinner right now. I'm making sidekicks pasta and with corn on the cob. Oh, bon appetit.
With a grilled spam.
Spam.
Grilled spam. I can't remember the last time I had spam.
I know.
Dylan, I don't even really know, to be honest, but I sliced a thin slice to make a grilled sandwich. It's stuff basically made like the way regular hot dogs are made, but I'm not eating spam exactly. Sort of. It's sort of. But it's called something else. I guess in Canada they call spam something else.
So bon appetit. Anyway, it's my turn. Your turn.
In the past, these systems could be based on religion, but the new secular state required secular justification for its laws, says blank.
So, intersex expert like Kraft Ebing, who wrote in the introduction to his first edition of Psychopathia that his work was designed to reduce humans to their lawful conditions, indeed continues the preface that present study exercise and beneficent influence upon legislation and jurisprudence.
Kraft Ebing's work chronicled sexual irregularity, made it clear that the growing middle class could no longer treat deviation from normal heterosexuality merely as sin, but as moral degeneracy, one of the worst labels a person could acquire. Call a man a cad, and you've settled his social status, wrote William James in 1895. Call him a degenerate, and you've grouped him with the most loathsome specimens of the human race. As Blank points out, sexual degeneracy became a yardstick to determine a person's measure.
So it seems like the middle class was pushed into this heterosexuality as the normative, and then everybody else was labeled a degenerate. And then you had religion that, helped push that because, again, they wanted to control people. They wanted people to reproduce. They wanted more slaves to the system.
And actually, what ended up happening only like 20 years later was that there was this really mean, brutal dictator guy who actually became the chancellor of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you guys would know who he was, Adolf Hitler.
Mm.
Yeah, that guy.
Mm.
He used ideas from social Darwinism, saying the strongest survive, only the fittest survive. And in his quest to destroy all the degenerates, including the Jews and the Poles and homosexuals and trans people,
Yep.
we know what happened with the Holocaust.
Right.
So this was all brought about by this classification system,
Mm-hmm.
where they ended up, weeding out. Eugenicism started. Darwin's cousin, Gallant or something like that. He actually started social Darwinism and the whole concept of eugenicism.
That's crazy. So degeneracy, after all, was a reverse process of social Darwinism. The procreative sex was critical to the continuous evolution of the species. Deviating from the norm was a threat to the entire social fabric. Luckily, such a deviation could be reversed if it was caught early enough, thought the experts. It is kind of like what they're trying to do now with transgender individuals. It's like we've made so much progress, and it's trans individuals have been around since the beginning of time. It was probably more of the norm, just like homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
But now, it's like there are people that are being threatened by our existence. So they got to try to do the same thing that was done back in the 1930s.
The formation of sexual inversion occurred for Krafft-Ebing through several stages and was curable in the first. Through his work, writes Ralph M. Leck, author of Vita Sexualis, Krafft-Ebing sent out a clarion call against degeneracy and perversion.
And all civic-minded people must take their turn on the social watchtower. So now they're making people into narcs. And this was certainly a question of civics. Most colonial personnel came from the middle class, which is large and growing.
Though some non-professionals were familiar with Krafft-Ebing's work, it was Freud who gave the public scientific ways to think about sexuality. While it's difficult to reduce the doctor's theories to a few sentences, his most enduring legacy is his psychosexual theory of development, which held that children develop their own sexualities via an elaborate psychological parental dance.
For Freud, heterosexuals weren't born this way, but made this way. As Katz points out, heterosexuality for Freud was an achievement. Those who attained it successfully navigated their childhood development without being thrown off the straight and narrow.
And yet, as Katz notes, it takes an enormous imagination to frame this navigation in terms of normality.
So according to Freud, the normal road for heterosexual normality is paved with the insidious lust of boys and girls for a parent of the other sex, with boys and girls' desire to murder their same-sex parent rival and their wish to exterminate any little sibling rivals. The road to heterosexuality is paved with bloodlust. The invention of the heterosexual in Freud's vision is a deeply disturbed production. Are we listening to this, folks?
That such an Oedipal vision endured for so long as the explanation of normal sexuality is one more grand irony of heterosexual history, he says.
I remember the talks of Oedipus complex, where, there's all sorts of stuff. So still, Freud's explanation seems to satisfy the majority of the public, who, continuing their obsession with standardizing every aspect of life, happily accepted the new science of normal.
Such attitudes found further scientific justification in the work of Alfred Kinsey, whose landmark 1948 study, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, sought to rate the sexuality of men on a scale of 0 exclusively heterosexual, to 6 exclusively homosexual. And these same scales were used to rate the types of trans individuals by Dr.
Benjamin?
Benjamin.
Yes. His findings led him to conclude that a large, if not majority, portion of the male population has at least some homosexual experience between adolescent and old age. While Kingsley's study did open up the categories homo hetero to allow for a certain sexual continuum, it's also emphatically reaffirmed the idea of sexuality divided between the two poles, as Katz notes.
And those categories have lingered to this day. No one knows exactly why heterosexuals and homosexuals ought to be different, wrote Wendell Ricketts, author of the 1984 study Biological Research on Homosexuality. The best answer we've got is something of a tautology. Heterosexuals and homosexuals are considered different because they can be divided into two groups on the basis of the belief that they can be divided into the two groups.
Though the hetero-homo divide seems like an internal, indestructible fact of nature, it simply isn't. It's merely one recent grammar humans have invented to talk about what sex means to us.
Heterosexuality, argues Katz, is invented within discourse as to that which is outside discourse. It's manufactured in a particular discourse as that which is universal, as that which is outside time.
That is its construction, but it pretends it isn't. As many French philosopher or child with a Lego set will tell you, anything that's been constructed can be deconstructed as well. If heterosexuality didn't exist in the past, then it doesn't need to exist in the future.
I was recently caught off guard by Jane Ward, author of Not Gay, who during an interview for a piece I wrote on sexual orientation, asked me to think about the future of sexuality. What would it mean to think about people's capacity to cultivate their own sexual desires in the same way we might cultivate a taste for food?
Though some might be wary allowing for the possibility of sexual fluidity, it is important to realize that various born this way arguments aren't accepted by the most recent science.
Researchers aren't sure what causes homosexuality, and they certainly reject any theories that posit a simple origin, such as a gay gene. It's my opinion that sexual desires, like all our desires, shift and reorient throughout our lives, and that as they do, they often suggest to us new identities. If this is true, then Ward's suggestion that we can cultivate sexual preferences seems fitting.
Beyond the word's question is a subtle challenge. If we're uncomfortable with considering whether and how much power we have over our sexualities, why might that be? Similarly, why might we be uncomfortable with challenging the belief of homosexuality and, by extension, heterosexuality, our eternal truth of nature?
In an interview with journalist Richard Goldstein, the novelist and playwright James Baldwin admitted to having good and bad fantasies of the future. One of the good ones was that no one will have to call themselves gay, a term Baldwin admits to having no patience for. It answers a false argument, a false accusation, which is what?
Which is that you have no right to be here, that you have to prove your right to be here. I'm saying I have nothing to prove. The world also belongs to me. Once upon a time, heterosexuality was necessary because modern humans needed to prove who they were and why they were, and they needed to defend their rights to be where they were.
As time wears on, though, that label seems to actually limit the myriad of ways we humans understand our desires and loves and fears. Perhaps that is one reason. A recent UK poll found that fewer than half of those aged 18 to 24 identify as 100% heterosexual.
That isn't to suggest the majority of those young respondents regularly practice bisexuality or homosexuality. Rather, it shows that they don't seem to have the same need for the word heterosexual as their 20th century forebears.
Debates about sexual orientation have tended to focus on badly defined concept of nature, quote unquote. Because different sex intercourse generally results in the propagation of the species, we award it a special moral status.
But nature doesn't reveal to us our moral obligations. We are responsible for determining those even when we aren't aware we're doing so. To leap from an observation of how nature is to a prescription of nature ought to be is, as philosopher David Hume noted, to commit a logical fallacy.
Why judge what is natural and ethical to a human being by his or her animal nature? Many of the things human beings value, such as medicine and art, are egregiously unnatural.
At the same time, human detests many things that actually are eminently natural, like diseases and death. If we consider some naturally occurring phenomenon ethical and others unethical, that means our minds, the things looking, are determining what to make of nature, the things being looked at.
Nature doesn't exist somewhere out there, quote unquote, especially independently of us. We're always already interpreting it from the inside.
Until this point in our Earth's history, the human species has been furthered by different sex reproductive intercourse. About a century ago, we attached specific meaning to this kind of intercourse, partly because we wanted to encourage it.
So you had the baby boomers, you had, the post-war families and all the houses that were built in the 40s and 50s and
Mm,
60s, and this whole thing about the nuclear family and all that, right?
right, let's see what we got here. Um, it says you learn about the Holocaust in grade school, and they only tell you one side of it. It wasn't until my last couple of years in high school that is learned it wasn't just the Jews we went after.
It's crazy to think that something so nature could be so demonized by the majority of society for so long.
I know but that's how they do it, folks. That's how they divide us. That's how they brainwash us. That's how they lie to us. That's how they push their religion and their beliefs and make us feel like we are wrong. They shame us. And in actuality, it's nothing further from the truth.
But our world is very different now than it was before. Technologies like pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, PGD, and in vitro fertilization, IVF, are only improving. In 2013, more than 63,000 babies were conceived via IVF.
In fact, more than 5 million children have been born through assisted reproductive technologies. Granted, this number still keeps such reproduction in the slim minority, but all technological advances start out with the numbers against them.
Socially, too, heterosexuality is losing its high ground, quote unquote, as it were. If there was a time when homosexual indiscretions were the scandals du jour, we've since moved on to another world, one riddled with the heterosexual affairs of politicians and celebrities, complete with pictures, text messages, and more than a few videotapes.
Popular culture is replete with images of dysfunctional straight relationships and marriages. Further, between 1960 and 1980, Cat notes that divorce rate rose 90%. And while it's dropped considerably over the past 3 decades, it hasn't recovered so much that anyone can claim relationship instability is something exclusive to homosexuality, as Katz shrewdly notes. And, the religious right wants to point out how bad those of us that are in the LGBT community are, but they aren't looking at their own lives and their own dysfunction. And the fact that they are probably we're the norm and they're the abnormal, if you really think about it.
The line between heterosexuality and homosexuality isn't just blurry, as some take Kinsey's research to imply. It's an invention, a myth, and an outdated one.
Men and women will continue to have different genital sex with each other until the human species is no more. But heterosexuality as a social marker, as a way of life, as an identity may well die out long before then. So that is very, very interesting. I mean, who knew, right? Because all we know from the time we're little, because we were different, we were ostracized, we were made fun of for the way we walked, talked, expressed our flavor and taste of things. And the actual fact is that we're not abnormal.
Yeah, there is this, in the 20th century, there was this concentrated effort to change our global society as we knew it before into this, from an agrarian, farm, small town, rural, connected community into this massive, monopolized, controlled, monstrously huge urban society, complete with tract homes and all these different high rises and apartments and streets and cable cars and taxis. And, you just visit New York City and it's bustling with, it's like an ant farm, it's just people constantly going here and there and that. And, there was this orchestrated effort to make room so that people could procreate, to create these cities for these people. So our population exploded because of the normalization of heterosexuality. But throughout history, heterosexuality was not the norm. Even in the church, they discouraged it. Why would we have monks and nuns? They didn't want men and women to get together because they thought that would pull them away from being spiritual. And they wanted the bonds of the men to keep them from falling prey to the vixens that were out there, these women. So it's really crazy what has been made into norm
and
was actually not being celebrated.
It was an invention, it was like created for procreation. It was created like an agenda of sorts, as we're seeing with a lot of things that are happening today.
Well, there's this book review for this book called The Invention of Heterosexual Culture, and it talks about even further before the 20th century, how heterosexual culture was not accepted as the norm, So I'm just going to just read some of this. Heterosexuality is celebrated in film and television, in pop songs and opera, in literature and on greeting cards, and at the same time, it is taken for granted.
It is the cultural and sexual norm by default, and yet, as Louis George's teen shows in The Invention of Heterosexual Culture, in pre-modern Europe, heterosexuality was perceived as an alternative culture.
Did you guys hear that? It was perceived as an alternative culture. The practice of heterosexuality may have been standard, but the symbolic primacy of the heterosexual couple was not.
So Sarah Burton comments, the author, for his strong and methodologically original addition to the field of sexuality studies.
Louis George Tin begins his book by making the bold claim that to truly grasp the nature of heterosexuality requires nothing less than an epistemological revolution.
The invention of heterosexual culture thus explore when, how, and why our society began to celebrate the heterosexual couple, through a focus on various historical opposition to heterosexuality, chivalric, ecclesiastical, and medical.
Tin provides a close reading of literature to explore the social and cultural shifts that altered the place of heterosexual culture in Western society from initial concealment to growing supremacy.
Setting out, because this thing is in the way, setting out from a perspective which claims heterosexuality as a blind spot, which being assumed to be ever present as a matter of course, and has escaped analysis as if transparent to itself, and tracking cultural changes from the medieval period to the 20th century.
Tin seeks to negotiate why and how heterosexuality moved from a mere also ran to the dominant mode of sexual behavior. Tin begins from a convincing theoretical position. There is certainly far less scholarship exploring heterosexuality than the pantheon of queer sexuality that is taken to be the other, quote unquote, and the historical perspective provides a much needed addition to the field.
So 10 begins by exploring the chivalric opposition to heterosexuality. That is the resistance and reluctance of feudal society to privilege female male sexual love and above male homosexual love as the ordering system of the culture.
Asserting that the original feudal culture pre 12th century was removed from that of womankind. Tin explores the phenomenon of male love in early medieval poetry, such as Les Chansons de Roland, and reflects on the manner in which retrospectively poetry has been taught and consumed in such a way to overemphasize opposite sex relationships.
Throughout the section, Tin draws distinction between homosexuality as constituting a physical act and homosociality, which he claims via the intimate friendship formed by knights of the courts, dominated medieval society as the principal form and understanding of the concept of love.
So, going back to the Spartans that were warriors and they fought together and they loved each other like a love that they had for each other.
Alexander the Great was, I don't know if any of you ever watched the film or the storyline, had his lover. It was very normal back in the day. It was actually preferred to have the male lover than, the wife was just the baby.
Dylan's mind is blown.
Yeah.
He says, wow, heterosexuality, an alternative culture?
Yeah.
My brain cannot compute.
Yeah.
So these systems that deconstructed what society considers as normal, reconstructed things in the way they wanted to. So we're talking something that was looked at as like, oh, that wasn't a big deal. Because back in the 12th century, males preferred to hang out with each other.
Right.
You had the knights around the table. You had the kings. You had all these things going on, and you even hear the story of David and Jonathan as having loved more than he would love women or something, right? So throughout the section, 10 draws distinction between homosexuality, like you said, as constituting a physical act, and homosociality, which he claims via the intimate friendships formed by the knights of the court, dominated medieval society as the principal form and understanding of the concept of love, acknowledging that in terms of marriage and sexual behavior, opposite sex relationships were still the norm at this time. Tin's real argument seems to be about the conception of love in Western society and how that is experienced and presented, rather than the actual sexual relationship and behavior taking place. Indeed, Tin makes some curious claims regarding the position of women in the culture of courtly love, which superseded the homosocial feudal society, writing
that is featured essentially a symmetric relationship where the female was the dominant figure, and frames a shift from the ascendancy of homosocial knight led to love to heterosexual love as pivoting on the confrontational between a new female control world and the original male-dominated order. Of course, the courtly love tradition did place women in authority regarding love and sex, but Tin appears to forget that it was men writing the love poems of the age and disregards the deeply precarious nature of female power.
That's interesting, though. It says that there was this female-controlled world. I mean, you guys, when you think about it, Queen Isabella was queen of the Spanish Armada, of the Spanish Empire, the most powerful woman, on the planet. Basically, Spain ruled in the Middle Ages.
People don't seem to understand that everything we are encountering this day and age is all lies, and everything is like twisted upside down. Why they're doing this, there's some, I don't know. They're just trying to really recreate history and throughout the truth,
Section 2 opens with Tin identifying a crisis of gender ensuing from the emerging heterosexual culture as a result of the, quote, intrusion of femininity into feudal society. He focuses on, in this section, on the changing relationship between the church and heterosexual relations,
bringing to the fore the medieval church position as based on a virgin birth and celibate child, and disciples were encountered or encouraged to leave their wives. Tin asserts that the notion of man-woman relations was a priority incompatible with Christian experience. In doing so, Tin again opens questions of what is actually is that feudalism, the church, and the medieval establishment were opposed to opposite sex relationship and love opposite sex sexual practices? Question mark.
Tin's focus throughout is on the relationship love angle, and he pays curiously little attention to sex drives or desires, recognizing that profane heterosexual love was tolerated on the assumption that it was chaste. What?
Chastity?
No.
No.
Recognizing that profane heterosexual love was tolerated on the assumption that it was chaste, that is conjugal, seems to demonstrate that it was not in fact the opposite sex nature of love that the church opposed, but rather the lustful carnal aspect of that same opposite sex nature.
Right. So given that by the point, sodomy was also a capital offense. It could be argued that counter to the Tin's presentation, the opposition formed by church, state, and science was to sex in all its form and not to heterosexual culture.
Well, one of the things that we must understand is that the word sodomy didn't mean like men on men and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It literally was any act that wasn't creating a human.
Yeah, baby sex. So Dylan says women were also mostly property and a means for procreation and to carry on a family legacy of royal bloodline, which is where the concept of marriage and ownership came from. It makes sense that
homosexuality was a normal thing among men, at least. It was a lot more taboo for women to engage in same-sex attraction, though as oppression was still at its highest. I think it's interesting, though. I mean, some of the most powerful rulers, even at that time, in this male-dominated world, were women.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think about the queens of England.
Yeah, there's a lot of queens.
I mean,
a lot of queens. Queen of Spain and all sorts. So the final section details the opposition from medicine to the cult of heterosexual love, with Tin basing his argument on contemporary evidence showing the medical profession's position that undue preoccupation with love and passion or a socio-pathological condition.
Tin examines closely the physical conditions that were thought to result from falling in love, including one's blood boiling, and follows this by scrutinizing the concepts of erotic, melancholy, and feminine hysteria. In doing so, the book begins to repeat current scholarship, but the connection Tin provides between medical arguments for treating hysteria with orgasm and the contemporary love poetry written delivers a novel twist to well-worn ground.
So ending with a claim that heterosexuality is a performed identity that constrains those who fall under it as much as those who lie outside. Tin posits the notion that heterosexual culture may be under threat in and out of itself as a hegemonic system. He links this to advances in reproductive technologies and prevalence of non-reproductive sex practices, and concludes that as the gap widens between heterosexual sex and reproduction, the dominance of heterosexual culture may well decline.
George Tin has produced a comprehensive social history of the negotiation of gender relationships since the 12th century. It's just interesting that all of these things that we thought were supposedly normal actually were abnormal.
Right.
When you look at the broader picture of what sexuality represented, at the time, men and women, they were like brought together, their families, it was like a contract. It wasn't like, Romeo and Juliet, I love you,
Yeah.
All this romance came in with the invention of heterosexuality. Because before, it was like, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what I need to do. I know that, even if you didn't like me, this is what my family chose. This is what we have to be. You need to provide me this many children. It wasn't anything based on anything having to do with what we know today about romantic
and
love.
the norm was like the soldiers were very close because their life depended on it, and they had a heterosocial homosocial relationship, I guess it was considered, more so than anything else. So what the church is pushing out, this anti-LGBT, is not what was seen in the past, and it's been well hidden. So
yeah, it says that, his main point, all human cultures rely on heterosexual intercourse for the reproduction of the species, or else we couldn't have men and women on the planet. Human cultures are not necessarily heterosexual, that is. They don't always give symbolic primacy to the man-woman couple and to love in its cultural, literary, or artistic representations.
in fact, he argues the West invented heterosexual love in the 20th century, 12th century. Before that time, the man-woman bond was not culturally predominant. He identifies three cultural formations that opposes the rise of heterosexual culture: chivalry, the church, and medicine.
So, man-woman bond was not culturally prominent, predominant. Did you guys hear that? That was not the norm. That was abnormal.
Yeah. And now they're trying to, it's crazy, but they don't realize that there is an agenda. There's a massive agenda, and it has religion written all over it.
Well, heterosexual culture arose in the 12th century. That's what this historian writes. Tin proposes, in opposition, heterosexual man-woman, right, to a culture of chivalry that celebrated homosocial bonds, like the knights and like those armies and stuff of the past. A church that denigrated carnal love of any sort, and a medical profession that stressed the harmfulness of sexual activity. He traces the first of these oppositions up to the 17th century and the others to the 20th.
So Tin proposes a middle way with an understanding of heterosexual culture that refers largely to literally production. He recognizes, of course, that heterosexual marriage was common, but argues that there was no culture of love built up around it. Yet surely the role of marriage in society is part of the history of heterosexuality.
Tin's reading of the Middle Ages and of specific medieval texts is problematic because it says the man-woman couple had not been celebrated in early medieval literature, of which there is in any case very little, but it was surely of central importance to the structure of society. Despite Tin's blanket claim that feudal society was homosocial, women were held to be of little account. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there's so much, you guys. I mean, it's like, it's crazy to think that, the things we've been taught, the things, I mean, I remember Bible college, they told us in marriage and family class, we took a class called marriage and family.
Right.
It was, there is no higher calling than that, to be a husband and a father, or a wife and a mother. That was like the supreme, like that was the highest call that one could have on their life, And
it's all based on religious indoctrination. This is why, homosexuality has been totally vilified, because they think they're the norm, and we look back at history and it wasn't. So this is why they're pushed. This is why it's almost like they're, I don't know, they're trying to like eradicate what actually is, what's the norm,
I mean, the fact that the church would demonize, sexual expression, it just speaks a ton about how religion has been used to silence humanity from
Totally.
really being able to explore its divinity.
Yeah.
You know, because there's something really powerful about sex, right?
Mhm.
That they basically said, unless it's in the bonds of marriage, you can't have it, you know,
Right.
unless it's, you know, and some would say, unless it's a specific time and it's a specific type of sex, then you can't engage in it. So that basically tells the rest of people who would never marry or find a person to, you know, make a contract with and share their life and resources with, that they would never ever be able to experience any kind of sexual expression.
Exactly.
You know,
So today we learned two misconception of testosterone and what people believe testosterone does, and this magic notion that it makes you the world's greatest athlete, and the fact that heterosexuality was not always the norm. So that's interesting. And on that note, we're looking forward to having you next Tuesday, Marcy. um, Marcy's going to be our guest
that's
on
going
our,
to be a great show. Looking
and
forward to that,
yeah.
really, because I mean, I have a lot of similarities to really empathize with Marcy about, with regards to religion and the damage that it's caused.
And as we look and see, it's like
It's got its ugly hands
yeah,
all over our history,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not a positive thing,
No,
you
not at
know.
all.
I mean, it's really not.
It's really, really sad. On that note, if you guys don't have any other questions, concerns, comments, we're going to go ahead and bid you all good night. And let's see here.
Oh, Marcy says, Dylan, I was really into Greek mythology and had read once the ancient Greeks were a majority same-sex couples and would only have hetero relationships to make babies.
Yep.
I don't know if it's fact.
Yep. Well, that's what kind of we were reading earlier in the first article, and that seems to be the facts.
Hormones says Dylan, are also said to affect your flow of sexuality, but I think even that hasn't been looked into a great deal.
There's a lot that we don't know. There is so much hidden knowledge, so many lies that we have been told. We're just now scratching the surface, and I think the powers to be don't like it, because there's a lot. Like today, we're watching Zeitgeist. I think it's the addendum. There's like 4 different movies out, and it really breaks down all of the systems and how they've been created to enslave us, to lie to us, for us to be mindless consumers, and not take a look at the value of human being versus the value of material, and being a wasteful um, species, making things that breaks every couple of years, and not realizing that we don't have a set amount of supply. It's not infinite, it's finite. And we continue to overpopulate the world. We continue to overconsume. We've got to throw away these stuff somewhere. The landfills are to the top, and we're destroying our oceans and all sorts of stuff. And, people are none the wiser, because they keep us all battling against one another, and not teaching the value, that we should be taught.
Darcy says, society says women can't be sexual or horny all the time. That's the misconception that people have on females.
Yeah. Yeah, and then if you think about all those venereal diseases and all these things that have been, in my opinion, created to keep us less sexual, as we were reading earlier, they didn't want people, they considered people that were sexual as degenerates, So, yeah, crazy stuff, crazy stuff. So, on that note, if we have something else during the week.
Marcy says, got too busy today, but sending pick and
Awesome.
tomorrow.
Yeah, as soon as you send me that, then I'll go ahead and schedule it. So with your little bio and all that stuff. But looking forward. Looking, it's going to be good. It's going to be really, really good. All right. So I think
Dylan says, Marcy, yeah, me too. I was really into it in my intermediate years, and I think that was part of the infatuation, mostly because that sort of thing wasn't seen as normal at the time or ever. You know, there is much to be understood,
Yeah.
you know, because this world that we've been fabricated to exist in, you know, was a concocted invention.
Yeah.
I mean, from like not too long ago. I mean, things that we think are true are not.
Mhm.
You know, things that we think are normal are not. I mean, the simple pink is for girls, blue is for boys, you know, that up until a certain time in the 20s, that wasn't even true. I mean, they didn't even think of gender. They didn't have stereotypes. They didn't have the word hetero or homo.
Yeah.
I mean, all these things are like inventions and created in order to control.
Yeah.
You know.
And to keep us as mindless consumers, to keep us fighting one another, you know, to just keep us away from our true divinity, from the true abilities that we have, you know. But that's how they, you know, that's how they make their, it's not even about money anymore. That's how they continue their power. Because it's about, you get to the point that you could only have so much money, and then the next step is power, you know, and craziness.
I think it's interesting if we look into like even further back what, and this is one of the things I was talking to you about a couple of weeks ago, is just finding out what was normal back in the earlier centuries, in the, you know, in the Greek civilization, in the times of the Romans. I mean, what was considered normal? Because everything that we have now is not what everything was back then.
Everything's, well, one of the things, men were allowed to have 4, 5, 6, 7, as many wives as they wanted.
Well, in certain, but you know, there were also matriarchal societies that existed. Even our own cultural island, the Tainos, they were ruled by a woman.
Yep.
There was a matriarchy. So, I mean, there's been so much lost to history, so much, like, you know, characters that their faces have changed, and the people that were literally the ones who were responsible, you know, they're like totally like blacked out from being in history, and it's replaced by something else. You know, I mean, for all we know, there are a lot of things that aren't what are being told was.
Darcy has a question.
I have a question, says Darcy.
Go right ahead, Darcy.
So yeah, it's phenomenal. Just I ran across that article. I was like, what?
I know, when you were reading,
heterosexuality
I was like,
wasn't normal?
I know. But see, we're so brainwashed. We're so indoctrinated with so many things. You can't believe anything that we've been told, because everything is based on control, on enslaving people. You know, they took the children out of the home and created the school, the institution, to indoctrinate. You know, I mean, seriously, we go to school from kindergarten to 12th grade. What do you learn? Things that are of no use to you. I mean, if you really want to remember what you learned from kindergarten to 12th grade, all those years, to teach you what?
Yeah.
It's like busy work, you know? It's like nothing that of any value. And then if that wasn't enough, then now you're going to get into debt to get a piece of paper to tell you that you're somebody. To then you could end up, you know, getting more into debt, buying a house, buying a car, more debt, you know. So then when you get to the point that you're in your 60s and you get to retire, your health is worthless, and then they dump you because they don't care about you.
So Dylan has a question.
They don't include these facts in textbooks because homosexuality is seen as wrong and inappropriate, even though it's a part of history. Yep.
And Darcy's question, why is society so set up that it makes only men to be the ones chasing women, while the women have the option to pick and choose? Why can't this be reversed? Is it a biological factor or a social one?
have no clue. I mean, a lot of things are set up.
I think there's, I mean, a code that exists, obviously unspoken, but understood by women, that they do have power. They know they have it.
Yeah. And they pretend they don't.
They pretend.
They pretend they don't.
I mean,
they're
it's like
the
my
poor,
mom would
helpless
say,
woman is so.
oh my gosh. La mosquita muerta.
Yeah,
the fly on the wall that's almost dying from not being able to get out. You know, it's like, you know, this is the thing that females don't want males to know, is that they have power. They just don't want you to know that they have power. Right?
Exactly.
So Dylan says, Darcy, I know it's really messed up. Men are degrading women if they have preferences, but women are encouraged to pick their flavor of men.
Yeah, we live in a very strange world. Extremely strange world.
And everything that is said, a feminist like a rad femme will always turn it around and reuse it against you. It doesn't matter. Whatever you say, whatever's said, a trans woman, if they say something, you know, it's like, oh, automatically you are this and that, and you know, it's like,
well, it's what the powers to be have done to divide and conquer. Everything that we're seeing in the world today is no coincidence. Everything that's happening from our political system, you have two sides, which people don't realize both wings belong to the same bird. You know, we've got corporations that don't care about you or I or anybody. They care about the profit they're bringing to stockbrokers, you know, because they want a bonus at the end of the year or whatever else. So just people don't think, you know, we've been taught not to think, just react pretty much.
I don't know. I remember this commercial. I was like in the 70s, and it was like this Italian mom who could cook really well, like a Chef Boyardee commercial or something.
Yes.
And then she says something like, but Mom, you're not the head of the family. And she goes, I'm not the head. I'm the neck that turns the head. It's like, that is what, you know, is being like hidden.
Yeah.
Is, you know, it's like, that's not spoken of. Shh, don't say anything. Yeah. But we're in control. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Darcy says it's sexist both ways for men and women, the way it's set up. It seems unfair for both.
Yeah. Yeah. It's part of that war. Can't keep people at peace with one another, because then if we were at peace with one another, we'd realize who the true enemies are.
I mean, John Gray wrote a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. They put men and women on separate planets, you know, to pick apart the differences, so much so. Then my little cousin just saw you guys on my phone, and he said, who's that lady? She's pretty. LMAO. You're meant pretty. Thank you.
Wow. That's awesome.
Thanks.
She is pretty. Very pretty. I love you too.
We're just like picking up for lost time, because in the past with our marriage, it's been really difficult dealing with all the outside influences that we've had. But, you know, I mean, it's so wonderful when things are normal.
Yeah.
Normal. Oh, wait. Does that make us heterosexual?
Whatever. So Darcy says, because men have a lesser chance, an unfair chance of finding a partner. That's because there's more women than men, right? Or something like that.
Men get this shit under the stick because the way the system is set up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, you know, nothing's really fair in life. People think that things have to be fair. If you really, really dig deep, nothing's really.
When 1% of the world's richest people own 40% of the world's wealth,
yeah,
that would tell you something about fairness.
Yeah.
There is no fairness.
Or just a bunch of slaves and don't even know it, you know? But, you know.
Darcy says, because men have a lesser chance, an unfair chance at finding a partner.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
We're
going to wrap this up.
Have some cottage cheese.
Yes, and yogurt with a granola.
We get like these. We were getting the toast with peanut butter, and now we got rice cakes and peanut butter.
I like change. Change is good. Change is awesome. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Dylan, Darcy, Marcy. Who else joined us today? I think that was
that other person.
That was there for a little bit. Oh, and Elliot, and what was that other young lady's name?
Alexa Bunny.
Alexa Bunny. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will catch you. We'll probably do another show before the week is over, but we're looking forward to having Marcy. That's going to be awesome.
Really good.
Really awesome. All right, guys. We love you, but remember to always love yourselves too. And that includes our haters.
Everybody.
All right, guys. Take care.